Hi everyone,
Hello guys,
I'm Veronika,
and I'm Waldemar.
and we really read from the screen.
Yeah, I'm gonna change it somehow, yeah.
Today we're watching Kurzgesagt, channel that I've watched already a couple of videos alone on this channel.
Yeah, I haven't watched it with Veronika because we wanted for Veronika to watch something on her own, and she's more interested in like science than me. I'm more...
You said it with such like disgust.
No.
Science.
Science. No, it's just like I'm more of a humanist person, more like in the history and stuff like that, and you're more in the like physics.
Mostly I like literature, but I also like physics.
Yeah, but you like to
biology.
watch, to listen like some podcasts about physics, stuff like that, and yeah, it's not my thing. And I know some, it's not like I'm totally ignorant, but it's not something that I do in my spare time. But yeah, this one is from this channel and it's more in my area of interests. So I thought I will accompany Veronika this time to boost her views with my presence here.
Sorry, Valdemar picked up the remote and I got anxious that he was gonna press something.
No,
Put it down. Yes, I'm glad that we can watch it together because I really like this channel, so it's nice.
Yeah. Let's begin.
10 years ago in 2014, we asked if war was over. Based on long-term trends in the last century, it seemed violent conflict was on the decline and the world more peaceful than ever. Our video began with the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the war between Hamas and Israel. And, well, a decade later, we could start this video exactly the same way. But is the world as a whole more violent today? In a nutshell, we made 7 claims in 2014. 1. We have less conflict deaths than ever. 2. There were almost no more wars between countries. 3. Democracies don't fight each other. 4. Borders are mostly fixed. 5. Most conflicts are in areas that were under foreign control either by colonial states or Soviet dictatorships. 6. More civil wars are ending by diplomacy. 7. We're in the most peaceful period of history. So, let's see how our video has held up. First, let's get an overview of conflicts in the last decade. Some of the deadliest conflicts that were glowing hot in 2014 have since ended or significantly cooled down. The war in Afghanistan ended with the victory of the Taliban. While
I'm sorry, but do you know this picture? It's like a meme or something, and I find it very true. It's sad, but it's so true. Like there is this picture of the world, and there are like conflicts in these parts of the world, like Africa, and they are like conflicts that people are like, oh yeah, they are always fighting there. And there are the more important conflicts, like in South America and Asia, and then there are the serious wars, like if it's in Europe or in the maybe Japan territory or North America territory. Then those are the serious wars. Yeah,
like Palestine feels like the first time that we care about something so remote. That we actually acknowledge that it's going on. And I think
it's only because it involves Israel.
Yeah.
Because if it's other countries, then we're like, oh yeah, that's yeah.
Yeah, but that's
true. It would be weird if there were peaceful there.
Yeah, but that's true. I remember at school when we were learning about wars, and you were like, "Oh, I'm so glad there are no wars going on in the whole world right now."
Yeah, exactly.
And the children in Africa, they're like...
Yeah, exactly.
while the civil wars in Yemen and Libya are all still ongoing, they turned mostly into stalemates. The proto-state of ISIS in Iraq and Syria has been wiped out. And, breaking news, the rebels just won the war in Syria last week.
Yeah.
The extremely destructive civil war in South Sudan.
Sorry for another pause, but I just have a conversation when I was at barber this week, and the guy was from Syria, and we had a long conversation about this because it was just the day after, or 2 days after the Assad fled the country, so it was kind of a big discussion.
Ended in a fragile peace agreement despite violence still flaring up in the devastated young country. Sadly, the last decade saw a bunch of new conflicts erupt, or old unresolved issues turn violent. One of the main claims of our video 10 years ago was that wars today are not between countries, and this is still largely true. Civil wars are by far the most common type of state-based conflict in the world. We'd wager that most of you have never heard about one of the deadliest civil wars in decades, the 2020 Tigray War in Ethiopia. It ended in 2022 with the victory of the Ethiopian and Eritrean government forces against rebel groups. Exact death tolls are unknown, but they may exceed 500,000, mostly civilians. Aside from Tigray, a number of new civil wars have broken out since 2014, although new is a bit misleading since the underlying issues were brooding at a smaller scale for a long time. The deadliest have been the Sudan Civil War, the Civil War in Yemen, and the Civil War in Myanmar. Multiple nations in Africa like Mali, Nigeria, Somalia, Burkina Faso and Mozambique are suffering from Islamist insurgencies that destabilize countries and have cost tens of thousands of civilian lives. Lastly, there are nearly 60 smaller unresolved state-based conflicts around the world, many going on for decades, that are smouldering but have a relatively low death toll in comparison. Maybe the worst news is that we've been seeing interstate wars again. There was the short-lived 2020 war between Azerbaijan and Armenia, which redrew contested borders. Then there's the latest war between Israel.
But if I remember correctly, it was about a very small part of Armenia, and I think Armenia gave up those territories to avoid the conflict with
I
Azerbaijan.
haven't heard about it, unfortunately.
It took a couple of days, it wasn't that long, but it was, like he said, an interstate conflict, so that's why it was important. But like Armenia was, because Azerbaijan was supported by Russia, I think, so Armenia was like, okay, it was about literally like a couple of villages, like 6 or 7 villages, something like that. If I'm wrong, please correct me, but that's what I remember.
Israel and Hamas that turned into a regional Then there's the latest war between Israel and Hamas that turned into a regional crisis. What is certainly the most disturbing new development is the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia. It's the first large-scale interstate war in 20 years, and the first war since World War II where a major power is trying to conquer territory and to subjugate another state. It followed an 8-year conflict that started with the 2014 Russian annexation of Crimea and the war in the Donbass. Exact casualty rates for the war since 2022 are hard to verify, but they go as high as hundreds of thousands. Okay, so what about our 2014 claims? If we add up the numbers, we see a few things. Roughly between 2004 and 2014, there were about 350,000 deaths from state-based conflicts worldwide. They were going down from 2014 to 2019 and then rose sharply in 2021. In total, from 2014 to 2024, we saw about 1.2 million deaths. If we include all violent conflicts like the Mexican drug war, the number rises to 1.5 million, 3 times higher than the previous decade. Actually,
but he's just talking about the interstate conflicts, he said.
He said that it's interstate, yes.
So why he counts the Mexican war on terror?
I don't know.
2022 had the highest death toll from violent conflict since the Rwandan genocide in 1994. The Tigray War and the war in Ukraine alone were responsible for the majority of lives lost, as both wars involved armies of hundreds of thousands of soldiers, sometimes thrown against entrenched positions in human wave attacks. So, the last 3 years have been unusually violent. But if we zoom out a bit more, we can put those numbers into perspective. A terrible thing, but nowhere near how bad it can get when the world goes to war. In the grand scheme of things, we are still living in relatively peaceful times. But the next decade will show if the trend will reverse or if the last few years were an anomaly. Unfortunately, there have been proper wars between states again, so our prediction on wars between countries didn't hold up. What is as true today as in 2014 is that almost all armed conflicts in the world are in countries that were under foreign occupation in the 20th century, either by colonialism or by the expansive Soviet dictatorship. Ethnic groups were split apart or forced together by arbitrary borders, resources unequally distributed, or power vacuums created, which led to conflicts that are in many cases still unresolved. There have also been no wars between democracies who seem uniquely unwilling to fight each other. So compared to the last century, it's still true that war between nations is still an exception rather than the rule. Instead, there's an increase in either victories or stalemates. These often aren't permanent resolutions to the conflict, only pauses in the fighting, because the underlying causes haven't been solved. For our claim about borders, we can see that most international borders in the world still hold up and are not challenged, but there are still a few dozen territorial disputes in the world, most of them in Africa and Asia. And some are getting hotter, like the border clash between India and China over Aksai Chin and Arunachal Pradesh. China's claim to Taiwan, or Venezuela threatening to annex part of Guyana's oil-rich province Essequibo. One thing that makes wars so deadly is that they're often supported by external powers. Many countries are providing support or arming up different sides or factions, like the competition between Saudi Arabia and Iran for hegemony, with Iran being the main supporter for the Houthis, Hezbollah or Hamas, or in the Ukrainian war, with the West supporting Ukraine, while China, Iran and North Korea support Russia. But it's not just countries. External powers keeping conflicts alive can also be Islamist groups like ISIS or criminal networks, or even local elites that benefit from.
It's ridiculous for me, like so many people in the Western countries, like the United States or in Europe, they are saying that Russia is they don't want a war, they are being it's United States that they are the ones that want war.
I think that's something I was talking to you about this yesterday, right?
Yeah, we were talking about this.
Scrolling the videos on TikTok, and I was very shocked to see how many people say that if not for the US, there would be no war.
But what is amazing for me is that you see allies that Russia has, like Iran, like North Korea, like it's like literally look. It's not as simple, of course, as good guys versus bad guys, but there are no like normal countries. I'm sorry, but North Korea and Iran are not the countries that are serious first world countries.
Yeah, but I mean, you can pretend that China is a good place to live in or something, but if
China is not really
Korea?
supporting them. If China was supporting Russia, then it would be a different story. But even China is like, no,
but North Korea
we can do
is
some
like,
trade, but we are not gonna give you like a heads up for that.
With North Korea, it's as if you saw like two people fighting, and one of them is supported by the devil, and you're like, oh, but that person, I'm sure they are in the right. Like, then why are they?
Exactly.
Then why are they supporting them? Do you know what's going on in North Korea?
How Americans, who are being threatened by North Korea like every second day, and then North Korea is like best friends with Russia, and those same people are saying that, I think Russia is really not such a bad guy. I think it's us that we are tempting them to go to this war, and why we just don't let them annex some part of Ukraine.
What is it? Mm-hmm.
From their own country being torn apart and effectively prevent conflicts from ending. The end of the rules-based world. There's a lot of debate among experts about what factors make the world more or less peaceful, but there are no easy answers. One of the major reasons the world has seen less conflict was that after the end of the Cold War, many countries expected a sort of rules-based world order, and for a time, this worked somewhat. But things have been changing in the last few years. The world has become multipolar, with new alliances forming, and the idea of a rules-based world is being challenged. China's manufacturing capacity is now as big as the US and Europe's combined. With its massive economic development, a new superpower has risen. It's common knowledge that the US spends more on its military than any place in the world, but this may no longer reflect the true balance of power. China doesn't report all of its military spending like the US does, and it gets a lot more done with each equivalent dollar spent. Recent estimates trying to account for these differences tell us China's effective military budget is now a significant portion of the United States' budget. And with Russia breaking the taboo of launching the first war of conquest by a major power in almost 80 years, Europe has begun the process of rearming. It is slow because, Europe is slow, but it is happening. We're in the transition to a multipolar world again, with different nations and alliances claiming spheres of power they want to dominate. In this climate, tensions and conflicts between states have been rising, even if most of them have not turned into wars yet. So, Is war over? The clear answer is no. And the direction we're headed in doesn't seem great. But with all the gloom, it's also true that we are still in a peaceful period of world history and that deaths by war are still at historic lows. The world is at a crossroads. We'll do another update video in 2034. Let's all hope we'll have better news for you then. Getting reliable information is hard enough, but it gets impossible to know what you can believe when misinformation and...
That's the end of the video.
That's
The rest is just
Oh, you can get a calendar.
advertisement. You want to watch it?
Maybe later, but that would be nice. You coming out of the frame, sorry.
You are sitting all video like this, but you always see me doing something wrong.
I always see myself doing something wrong too, and you're still coming out of the frame.
You will
Sorry,
record
yes.
this yourself.
I don't want to. It's only fun because I'm
It
doing
wasn't.
the video.
It was an okay video, but
It wasn't very informative.
It wasn't very informative. Yeah.
I wonder if it's because he's maybe a little bit better at science, because the science videos that I watched, they were much more informative. Although, now that I think about it, they were also sometimes a little bit basic. So maybe he just because we are so used to videos going really in depth, the ones that we watch on this channel, and this is, I think, more for people who are, just scrolling and they just want a little bit of information.
But it was like it had the same amount of information as you would expect from a TikTok video,
but very long.
It was much longer. But you didn't get any value for like the time that you spent. Like we learned about some of those conflicts that we haven't heard of before, but he just mentioned them, so we won't remember them. For a couple of days later, we won't remember what those conflicts were, because they were only mentioned by name and nothing else. Like he gave us some statistics, and that's interesting. Like with China and their production capabilities and military spendings, that is what I think I will remember mostly from this video. But besides that, it's okay, but it's not a great one.
I think it also depends on the audience, because it's a very soft way of putting the knowledge, but I think it's also easier to remember like this. There's not a lot of information. The information is kind of repeated as well. It's given to you, spread it out between animation and music. I think it depends who it's for.
Maybe. And
But
also
maybe
I
it's not
don't like
for
the
us.
point that he made during this video, like the one that we are living in a peaceful period. Like, yeah, but who? Like,
Not the people who died anymore.
and not people in those countries that are affected by the war. So it's like, yeah, and like this whole vibe that I get from this video was like, yeah, there are some conflicts, and we are at the crossroads, but mostly we don't have that much to worry about, because when you looked at the Second World War, it was much scarier. Like, yeah, of course, but we cannot compare everything to the single biggest conflict in human history.
I was expecting a little bit more of analysis. That I know he can't, and no one can give us an answer, like, is there going to be a war? But I was expecting him to more like go into details of the behavior and maybe stuff that, for example, Russia or I don't know, Israel, that they are doing or not doing that they would have done, like, don't know, 50 years ago or 100 years ago, that we are no longer doing, if you know what I mean, that there like some lines are not being crossed anymore, and so we can think that we are not going to have another big war, or maybe these lines are being crossed, so we can think that we are going to have it. That's what I expected.
He touched many different subjects, but none of them very deeply, and because of that you felt unsatisfied with all those topics.
Well, mostly I wanted him to make like a deep analysis and just tell me that everything's gonna be okay, but
I can tell you that everything's gonna be fine.
that was not very convincing.
Let's finish this video because we are started to yawning. It's pretty late.
Yeah.
So thank you guys for watching with us. And yeah, if you enjoyed this video, let us know. I haven't so much, but well, we are trying to
Maybe next time you'll give him a chance for one of the science videos. I'll choose the best one.
All right. We can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, we are doing different kinds of videos on this channel, and not all of them are the great hits. Sometimes we have some misses. We have some videos that we haven't uploaded, of course, because they were not very good at all. Like recently, we watched South Park video, and it was